Tonight, I'm Shivani Garhat, and joining us from our Delhi studio is my colleague Sumita Karir. Now, Sumita, China concludes military drills around Taiwan this week. These including dispatching of jet fighter, naval ships and Coast Guard vessels. Now, the US State Department released a statement that China's move is unnecessarily raising tensions in the area. Now, Taiwan president said that they are determined to defend their sovereignty and boost their defense. Sumita, like you've been tracking this story through the day today. Tell us more on what else is happening.
Absolutely, Shivani. In continuation of what you just stated, remember just a few days back, US President Donald Trump stated that nothing worries him and that he also said that China has been doing these drills for years now. Now, since 2022, China has conducted 6 military drills near Taiwan. Now, another thing to note here is the fact that Chinese drills this time around began 11 days after US announced a record $11.1 billion arms package for Taiwan. So what to really make of these developments around Taiwan? And does this essentially mean that an invasion is likely? To discuss that and more, I'm now joined by Srikanth Kondapalli. He's a professor in Chinese studies in JNU. We will also be shortly we are also joined, I'm told, by Pramit Pal Chaudhuri. He's the head of South Asia practice at the Eurasia Group. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for taking the time out and speaking to us here on ET Now. Pramit, let me come to you first. Now, the Taiwan's invasion of China has been talked about for a long period of time in these fresh exercises. With these fresh exercises, this issue has gotten reignited once again. Are we looking at a protracted period of tensions between China and Taiwan? And is China looking at an imminent invasion of Taiwan?
I don't expect an imminent invasion, but I do expect a degree of tension. I'll explain that one, Xi Jinping has based part of his legitimacy as a leader of China. In fact, during his struggle to become the leader, one of the things he espoused was the reunification, that he would be the man who would reunify China, and that, of course, incorporated Taiwan. Second is that the present Taiwanese government is the most pro-independent government in Taiwan, in recent Taiwanese history. And it's been a major concern for the Chinese that they need to maintain a certain degree of pressure on him to make it very clear that any actions and even statements moving towards Taiwanese independence would be treated result in a very strong reaction from the Chinese. Perhaps not invasion, but I think military blockade or something equally strong would be something that China would be prepared to consider. And third, and I think arguably the most important thing, is that they have in the true, should we say, the primary defender of a independent Taiwan is the United States. And we have a Trump administration that is, should we say, not indifferent, but unclear as to what its position in Taiwan is, compared to, for example, President Biden, who 3 times publicly said America would fight for Taiwan. Trump has been back and forth on that issue. And right now, at a time when Trump is desperate, it seems, to get some sort of a trade deal with China, this gives China the opportunity to at least send messages to Taiwan and to other parts of Asia that you can no longer depend on the United States to necessarily defend you, even against a blockade, let alone an invasion.
Yeah, absolutely. You pointed it out, right? And now I'm moving on and asking Srikanth Kondapalli, and thanks for waiting patiently for your turn for the question. But as our fellow panelists mentioned, how US has been back and forth on the Taiwanese stand as compared to Biden, who was certain about it. Xi Jinping, in his latest address, in fact, spoke about the unstoppable mandate and the Taiwan reunification in the 15th, 5-year plan. I wanted to come to you and ask you, how do you read that? Is CCP operating on a fixed timeline for this? Is this statement a warning, a timeline, or simply a domestic political message?
Both of them. I think the last one sending a domestic political message, because the Communist Party in the 100th anniversary in 2021 mentioned about six no's on Taiwan, that no country, no individual, no organization, no institution, etc., can divide Taiwan from China. So this is basically catering to the domestic constituency, which has become a little bit of nationalistic in nature. And so this is towards that constituency. However, there is a report that President Xi had asked the PLA to unite with Taiwan by 2027, which is the 100th anniversary of the People's Liberation Army. We do not know whether the Chinese are prepared for this kind of eventuality, because they need to cross about 180 nautical miles in order to accomplish this. And also, Taiwan is no pushover in the sense that they have highly modern military equipment, including the F-16s and IDF's indigenous defense fighters and Xiongfang missile systems, which are cruise missiles, and they can have a number of targets in China, within hinterland China. So in other words, it's not a cakewalk for the Chinese, and so they need to weigh this scenario building, whether they intend to really take over Taiwan or is it a pressure tactics. Invasion would also mean huge costs for both Taiwan and China, and the costs in the sense of casualties, in the sense of whether they will be able to really successfully conduct such a kind of invasion. They need to weigh all these possibilities. Initially, they thought of 6 methods. One is amphibious operations. Second is C4ISR paralyzation of the Taiwan Straits. Third is overall invasion. Fourth, in terms of the SRBM attacks, short-range ballistic missiles attack. And a fifth one is a submarine blockade, and a sixth one is aviation attacks. We did see in the current exercises some of these being practiced. For example, live fire of the artillery and rockets. Secondly, the blockade closer to the Taiwan Straits. So they are preparing, but given the Ukrainian conflict, that it took nearly 4 years, indicates that the war is unpredictable in Taiwan Straits.
Absolutely.
And the cost could be very high
Absolutely.
for China. And so they were doing all of these in order
Absolutely.
to intimidate the Taiwanese to
Right.
fall apart. But that is also not happening. And hence
Right.
the rhetoric that we
Right.
see from China in regard to the
Right.
exercises.
Right, Mr. Kondapalli, and one doesn't really know whether China is pursuing the boiling frog strategy, as many analysts have claimed. But let me come to you, Pramit. So if China is indeed looking at the reunification of Taiwan, and the fact that if China states that that is unstoppable, and if it indeed goes on and carries out that plan, what will be the consequences for India, and how should India pursue that matter?
Well, I think Professor Kondapalli correctly pointed out the economic consequences will be enormous. Some years ago during the Biden administration, I met members of the U.S. National Security Council who were looking at exactly this topic. And their calculations was quite staggering. They said in a full-scale war, or one in which Taiwan's ability to export products, including semiconductors, obviously, would be blocked. And one in which the United States, which would also bring in Japan, would try to defend Taiwan, you would see virtually all trade via air or sea coming out of China, Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, coming to a to a halt. And their calculations were that almost a quarter of global GDP would evaporate, which would be almost equivalent to a Great Depression. And they'd made a point of sharing this with the Chinese to make it very clear that it's not just a question of whether you can militarily defeat Taiwan, which itself is a difficult task. Amphibious warfare, amphibious invasion is one of the most difficult forms of battle. and one of the most unpredictable. But the other element is that you would essentially destroy a large chunk of your own economy. In fact, you would drive the Chinese economy into a recession. And so you have to make a calculation of whether this is worth it. Taiwan continues to be, as you know, the producer of something like 70 to 80% of the world's high-end semiconductors. Nobody in the world comes close or can't even match it, least of all mainland China, though they've tried desperately to close that gap.
On that note, Pramit Pal Singh, I have to butt in and ask you a question. Okay, the sacred mountain in Taiwan is considered to be its Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company that, manages up to 70 to 80% of the global supplies of semiconductor. And that's why many experts in the past have said that it's very, very difficult also to put, your hands on Taiwan for China. But is it really a deterrent now, or is it a trigger for escalation? Simply put, if I were to ask you, is it too valuable to not to seize for a country like China?
Well, let's put it this way. If it would be well worth the prize to seize if you can seize it without destroying it. And that is the problem that the Chinese or any country would face regarding Taiwan, is that it's just a handful of giant factories. I mean, these are handful, but each factory is, a $60 to $120 million capex, and the technologies, the technicians involved are almost irreplaceable. Nobody else knows how to make a 3 or 4 nanometer chip on the scale and efficiency of the Taiwanese. So my sense would be that was why everybody assumes that China would not consider a full-scale conventional military invasion, but a blockade, an attempt to find a means to destabilize Taiwanese politics politically and on the domestic front, would be a more likely method. But I think for the Chinese, it would be more of a case of keep testing the United States. So they've just concluded the biggest military exercises they've ever had around Taiwan.
Absolutely.
And basically said, look, the Americans did not respond.
Yes.
I could see them potentially doing a blockade one day and then waiting to see, oh, look, if the Americans don't respond. And the idea would be to tell the Taiwanese, you cannot depend on the Americans or anybody else to defend you. So why don't you just accept the inevitable and start negotiating your joining us?
Right, Pramit, but the ramifications, if at all there is, of course, escalation in hostilities, the ramifications of this are going to be economic, like you previously stated, and of course a trade war is something that the world cannot really afford to one more trade war between the United States and China. But let me come to you, Professor Kondapalli. How will the United States respond to Taiwan, especially in this matter, in terms of how much it wants to engage itself in this clash, and how critical from that point of view will Japan be?
The United States came out with a national security strategy in which they mentioned about the focus on Western Hemisphere and giving the other areas for the countries to mend for themselves. So the 19th century isolationism is coming back in the US foreign policy under President Trump. And that means and as President Xi and President Trump had a phone call soon after the Busan meeting on October 31st to kind of put pressure on Taiwan, that President Xi had insisted with President Trump. It indicates that there is the United States not showing much interest in the Taiwan Straits, even though they did make some statements on Taiwan Straits currently in terms of the exercises, on easing of the exercises, etc. But nevertheless, we see the retrenchment of the United States in the region, at least theoretically, which indicates that there is a looming challenge from China for Taiwan. That's number one. We did see, of course, the $11 billion of arms transfer that United States has announced as part of the Taiwan Relations Act of 1979, when one side of the Taiwan Strait becomes stronger, the United States is obliged under the 1979 Taiwan Relations Act to provide arms to Taiwan, which they have announced under the Trump administration. So we do see this, but these are all very minor military equipment. These are not very offensive in nature. These are spare parts and others for the Taiwanese military, which indicates then that the Taiwanese would have to really look for alternatives. And this is where the Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takeuchi's comments about the existential threat for the Japanese in terms of a potential Taiwanese invasion, Chinese invasion of Taiwan.
Absolutely.
This comes into the picture. So there is the Japanese role, which since Shinzo Abe's time, they have announced that kind of posture. And recently, the Japanese have sent their ships to the region through
Indeed.
the Taiwan Straits.
Indeed.
And so they have indicated their resolve. On your question on how does that impact on India, number one, we have the PSMC, not the TSMC, but PSMC concluding an agreement with Dholera factory and in Assam to produce something like 46,000 wafers in these plants from this year on, which indicates that today we have some stakes in the Taiwan Strait stability. A few years ago, after Nancy Pelosi's visit, the Ministry of External Affairs made a statement suggesting to peace and stability in the Taiwan Straits. So that indicates now also the third factor, we have out of $2.4 trillion of trade in Taiwan Straits, we also have something substantial here because we trade with China, we trade with Taiwan, and also with the Eastern Asia. That suggests we need to be cautiously looking at the situation, evolving situation, and need be, we need to coordinate with Japan, Australia, and the United States
Absolutely.
in this
We need
region.
to be cautiously looking at the emerging situation. Thank you, Mr. Srikanth Kondapalli and Mr. Pramit Pal Chaudhuri for joining us for this conversation today. I'm afraid I'll have to wrap this discussion right here. We're a little